Hello, today on the Euro Express we head to London where we collect Pierpaolo Finaldi, the CEO and publisher of the Catholic Truth Society. We then take a trip to Surrey in England where Fiorella Nash boards the Euro Express. Fiorella, Pierpaolo, welcome on board the Euro Express.
Thank you very much.
Pierpaolo, if we start with you, publisher of the Catholic Truth Society, many people know the Catholic Truth Society, but you may want to remind us just how long it's been around and its influence upon the Catholic English-speaking world.
So the CTS was founded over a century and a half ago as a venerable Victorian pamphleteering society, and since then it's kind of grown, it's changed. It's taken on all kinds of different media, all kinds of different publishing. So at the moment, we do everything from prayer cards to booklets to big leather-bound volumes that sit on the altar in every church in England, Wales, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, and Brunei, just to name a few of them.
And it's a truly interesting sort of history, because from its foundation until now, it has seen many, many changes within the publishing industry in general, and the way in which people engage with printed material or written material. But I would wager that the current situation we find ourselves in at the beginning of the 21st century, with the onset of social media and also the way in which people consume the written word, it must be the strangest, or certainly one of the most unusual periods in the CTS's history.
Absolutely. I mean, we started off with our own printing presses, printing very simple black and white pamphlets. And then we moved on, as most publishers do, to using printers as kind of outsourcing all our printing. And we moved from very kind of cheap, very things which were sold really through a kind of subscription model to a more traditional retail model. And although CTS has always had this incredible kind of bookshop in every parish, which is the CTS rack, which is really an amazing kind of invention, an amazing way of getting our publications all over the country. I mean, these racks have, suffered for the first time in a century and a half, have been emptied by COVID, unfortunately, because of the rules surrounding materials that can be handled by various numbers of people. So unfortunately, for the first time in a century and a half, the racks at the back of parishes, CTS racks, lie empty. But fortunately, we have a whole panoply of other ways of getting books to people. Be that through our own website, through many websites that people can order our things. But I mean, you were talking about all the various different ways in which books have become available. And I think probably about 15 years ago, many of us in the book trade were looking at the Kindle with a certain amount of trepidation, thinking that really it was the end of the road for the printed book, for the paper book. And that really never kind of happened. The Kindle itself, I think the height of its sales was about 8 years ago now, and it's been in decline since. However, many people have been reading books not just through a Kindle, but also on phones, etc. So, the digital book has certainly continued to be present, but it hasn't taken over in the way that many of us feared, and some people probably hoped. But in fact, I was just speaking this morning to an expert in the kind of book selling trade who was telling me that the whole kind of COVID crisis has, if anything, brought the printed book right back up to the top
Really?
of the items that are kind of seeing people through this difficult time. That's
incredible. Publishers and booksellers need authors, and we turn to Fiorella, who's written many novels and some non-fiction work, and indeed you have been published by the CTS as well. You have the joy of seeing your work in the printed form. You've seen it I think online as well, being downloaded by people, and also now audiobooks are coming through. I mean, how much does the average author pay attention to the various trends, which is Pierpaolo's meat and drink every day, trying to work out ways in which the word is consumed? I mean, for the author, is that something which comes into your mind, or is it strictly just the work that you're embarked upon?
Well, of course, I trust the publishers know what they're doing, and I leave the publisher to deal with that. But no, of course, I think if you're an author, you're always thinking, how is my work going to be communicated? And I can see the trepidation there was when Kindle first came out. Personally, I'm happy for people to read my books in any medium as long as they're reading it. But I have noticed the audio book really taking off in the last few years. That seems to be the latest platform. People spend more time in their cars. They've got smartphones. They have the headphones on, and they're wanting to be listening to things on the go. And I think that is a medium that can potentially change the way storytelling happens, because it's almost like returning to the oral tradition of writing.
It's interesting that you mention audiobooks, because there is something almost primeval about the sort of oral storytelling, and going back to a time when perhaps our ancestors sat around the fire listening to stories together. But Pierpaolo, do you think there's something about, it's interesting what you say about the printed page, do you think there's something about books, something tactile, something we like to hold, that just doesn't seem to go away?
Absolutely. And I think as Catholics, we understand that almost better than anybody else, that there's a kind of sacramental power in the thing, the actual thing that you can hold in your hand, the thing that you look at. And that's why it's so important that books are they're not just kind of vehicles for the words that are in them, but they're objects in themselves that need to be made well, they need to be beautiful. I mean, I always think, not judging a book by its cover is kind of the worst possible thing you can say as a publisher, because the cover says so much.
Yes. And
it needs to be attractive. I mean, one thing that I always think is everything in the world, whether it's on in the media that's kind of pumped into our houses at all times, is all done, produced to the kind of nth degree. And we, just because the things that are between the covers of the book are so important, it sometimes leads kind of Catholic publishers and things to think a bit less about how the book looks and how it stands up to the kind of secular competition. Whereas, if anything, ours should be more beautiful.
Correct.
Ours should be more attractive because of the very thing that we're speaking about.
Absolutely, especially the sacred nature of some of the words of the Holy Mass, or even the Bible. These should be things of great beauty to look at before somebody opens them. I mean, would you say that, because I agree with you totally, that people do judge books by cover, but you know the old saying that you judge a meal with your eyes before you eat it. There's something about getting hold of a well-crafted book, would you say, that just sort of invites you in. It almost sort of begs you to start reading it, which you're more than happy to do. Do you know that sensation?
Well, who hasn't picked up a book, kind of felt it, even opened the pages and smelt them? I mean, that one of the greatest joys of a new book delivery for us is to open it and smell that lovely kind of new printer's ink. I mean, but it's interesting that the church kind of recognizes this almost within, for example, her liturgical law. So if you look at the general instruction of the Roman Missal, or even the general instruction of the lectionary, it specifically states that the liturgy should not be celebrated from missalettes or things which are kind of to be used and then thrown away. The liturgy should have books which are beautiful and which are noble. And not to drop any names, but when we presented the first copy of the Roman Missal to Pope Benedict XVI, his immediate comment was that it's important that books that we use in the liturgy should be beautiful. And, I think he recognized that we put a lot of effort into the artwork, into the materials that we used, and that, in a sense, the book that you use certainly feeds into the way that you celebrate the liturgy, or even the way that you read it. I mean, wasn't it Machiavelli states that, well, you know, when he read the classics, he would dress up in his finest because he was going to meet some of the greatest minds that had ever existed.
Yes.
And the portal which brings us into contact with these people or with these truths or with these beautiful things are the books themselves. So they should be as beautiful as the words that are contained within them.
Fiorella, as an author, what's it like? Explain to us that sensation when something you've laboured on for maybe a year, maybe a number of years, and you've had various edits and backwards and forwards with the publisher. The day that it's sort of the edition pops through your letterbox and lands on the mat and you rip it open and look at it. Talk us through that sensation.
It's wonderful. It's like being 5 years old again on Christmas morning. It's this, I never cease to be excited opening the box and seeing them there. Because, to be honest, the editing process is so soul-destroying for an author. You want to be creating. You write this manuscript, you create this story, and then there's the endless back and forth. Did you mean to put a comma there? Can you change this word for the American audience? What did you mean by this? What did you mean by that? And by the end of it, you don't want to see the text ever again. I mean, I know authors who won't even open the book when it arrives because they've been through this agonizing process of watching their work being put together. It's a very necessary part of the journey, but it's probably the hardest. But I still find when I actually see the book, I'm always very intrigued by what the cover's going to look like, because as you say, the cover is the book. A friend of mine who's an artist said that he was at one of my bookstores once and he said, well, I like the look of that one because actually if the artist has done their job, then it should tell you everything that the book is about. They should have captured on the front cover the essence of the story, the main themes. It's a huge artistic project in itself. I've seen some books with horrendous front covers where it could have been a work of genius, but I wasn't going to pick it up. So I think, in fact, the way it is presented is important. And I suppose when it comes to, say, the audio platform, which is developing, there's another layer of creative process in that because the narrator has to know what they're doing. The narrator is almost like the translator when it goes into another language. But whether they perform it correctly will say a lot for whether or not people actually enjoy it. So I think that there's a lot involved with that. But no, there is something special about handling your own book. Absolutely.
But going back to what you were talking about, Pierpaolo, there, in terms of the book and in terms of prayer and the missal, etc. We all three of us grew up in a post-Vatican II era, and we probably all had the experience of coming across our parents' missals. Do you remember that experience for the first time? Where you'd find these books with strange lettering and strange words for a ritual which we didn't quite understand. We knew it was Catholic and we knew it was old, but we didn't quite understand it. But I have to say that on my part in particular, I did look at these wonderfully crafted books with the beautiful lettering and artistic interpretation. And then I looked at our missalettes, this sort of throwaway that you got at the back of the church. And I did wonder about the way in which that leaves us feeling as Catholics. And what do you think, Pierpaolo? Is the missalette your sort of worst nightmare when it comes to something liturgical?
It has its uses, I suppose. But recently I've been reading a biography of St. Francis, and one of the strange things that St. Francis keeps kind of going on about is that we should honour scraps of parchment where the word of God is written. Something that he goes on about a lot, which is kind of comes across as quite odd. And I think that in a sense, for us, that really comes into its own when we think about the way that we treat books which contain the word of God, the way that we treat Bibles. I was having a chat this morning to one of our editors talking about, the idea of a paperback Bible. And I don't know, just kind of instinctively, that just sounds wrong to me, because, the book which contains the word of God needs to be kind of durable, needs to be made of a kind of noble material, and needs to be lasting. And I think that one of the I mean, you were talking about some of those kind of missals that came out in the 60s and 70s. And I think in their kind of desperate desire to be kind of relevant and of the moment, the artwork in those just has dated very quickly.
Yes.
Whereas when you looked at those older missals, they have a kind of timeless quality, which still speaks to us today.
Yeah, absolutely. However, there's something about, I mean, the current CTS daily missal, you would need a sort of a forklift truck to move it around the churches if you were trying to use it for Mass. I mean, it is a hefty tome, but we are in an age of portable communication, and most of us carry mobile phones which now contain all the scriptures, daily missals, and various other things. So how do we capture something of the sacred, something of the essence and the beauty and the specialness of the word, be it sacred or be it secular, in portable devices? I mean, it's a big challenge for the CTS, but also there's a challenge for the writer, I would guess, in that. But Pierpaolo, first of all, how do you engage with that?
So, well, just a word on the CTS Daily Missal at 3,400 pages. I think it's the longest liturgical book that's ever been produced in English.
And that's just the pocket edition.
Yeah, that's just the pocket. No, I mean, when they talk about a doorstep, that truly is one. But we thought it would be useful to have everything in one place. And to be honest with you, it's turned out to be a great seller, and despite being fairly expensive. But going back to your question about having the words of the liturgy or the scriptures on our devices. I mean, the church has a kind of wisdom in setting aside places for holy things, or places where we do kind of holy activities, should we say. And I think one of the problems with, for example, reading your breviary from a mobile or from an iPad, and I have seen this happen more and more even in masses with clergy using iPads, etc., instead of liturgical books, is that these devices fulfill many roles. You order your takeaway, you watch funny videos of cats, you get messages from your friends, all these different things, and all of those things are kind of coming into this device, and often they're all kind of competing for your attention.
Yes.
So when you open up the breviary and you start your prayer and you get a funny photo from your brother-in-law or whatever it is, I think there is that much more danger of being distracted away from the business of prayer, and especially in the liturgy. And I think we also all know that many devices that connect to the internet are used for kind of less than savory purposes, and I think it's really important that we try and kind of keep a distinction between the things that we use for the profane and the things that we use for the sacred. And I think picking up a nicely bound volume that can immediately put us in that kind of zone for prayer. I find it almost impossible to pray from my mobile. Sometimes I have to do it, but every time I do it, it's full of distractions, and it just doesn't do the same thing as picking up a nice breviary or something.
Do you think? I mean, both of you are parents with children of various ages. Fiorella, do you think this is a slightly generational thing, that older people find it much easier to settle into a book, especially a sacred book at Mass or whatever? I mean, do your children find it? There's absolutely no dichotomy between the screen, be it reading the words of the Mass or watching EWTN's Euro Express.
To be honest, I think it is so much part of their lives now that, as you say, I'm not sure that there is such a distinction in their minds, really. It's just a tool or a platform, if you like. They don't use screens at Mass. I'd probably draw the line there just because I wouldn't be entirely sure what they were looking at.
Yeah.
I just want to be a little bit certain they were definitely looking at the Mass. But having said that, I take the point about the distractions. I think that is a really major problem. I mean, you can switch off notifications, but you will still see them.
Correct.
But, for example, when we say the family rosary, we use an app. I have a rosary app on my phone, and it has the most beautiful icons for each mystery and a little meditation. It's been very well crafted to be an aid to meditation. And I think my children are more used to praying the rosary using a phone than using the beads, dare I say it. That's probably an awful admission to make, but they are at least praying. But it's this distraction. I think it's difficult to get round that, because yes, I know perfectly well if a text message comes in, I will be itching to see it. Everything, I will have to stop myself from pressing the button. So, I suppose you don't want to overburden yourself with possible distractions.
So in this 21st century, I mean, there's a challenge for both the challenge for the writer, I guess, is that now, Fiorella, you are surrounded by various platforms, I think is the word they use so it's written page, it's audio, it's all these different ways in which your written word can be transmitted to the reader in whatever guise. Does that affect the way you write?
I don't think it does. I'd like to say I don't think it does. In some ways, I feel it ought to give a writer more confidence, because one thing that the internet has done is created a much more level playing field for authors. Yes. My books are on Audible on the same platform as the great masters.
Yes.
I'm not pretending as many people are going to read them, but they're at least all there available in the catalogues. It's not quite as straightforward as that, but it's not quite the way it was in the past, where you had to get your publisher to pay a huge fee to a bookshop to get your book into the window or onto the display. That's right. They're just much more readily available. I can have my website, that's my shop front. The publisher, Ignatius, has their shop front as well, and people can just click a button and see all your works. So in a way, that's probably more helpful to the author and less helpful to the publisher, perhaps. I think we maybe, our interests are mostly fairly closely interlinked, but maybe that's some area where there's there might be differences of opinion.
Well, let's ask Pierpaolo. I mean, has the internet leveled the playing field, or has it just? Some would say that it has given certain platforms, we all know which ones we're talking about, who sell books, a disproportionate control over what gets seen by people and who's going to buy it. If we all go to the one portal to buy books, it's not such a good thing as having a many different shop fronts online. But in terms of printing, do you feel that? Do you feel now that the CTS is not so dependent on the few shops it had and subscriptions and catalogues, written catalogues, that you are experiencing and perhaps enjoying a level playing field?
I mean, to an extent, that is true. We have the possibility of selling the books way outside the church rack, for example, which was where we traditionally had all our booklets. It does make it a little difficult, especially for kind of smaller outfits, because now you have to cover just such a kind of wide range of channels, and maybe each channel doesn't make a huge amount of difference by itself, but all of them together end up being quite a big chunk of your sales, because if you want to put out an ebook or something, in the end it's not just Kindle, it's Kobo, it's Apple Books, it's all these different platforms. And so to a certain extent, when you see the big guys kind of take over a particular channel, in one sense, you're kind of relieved because you don't have to worry about the other 25 that have kind of fallen by the wayside. But you're very conscious that you end up being very dependent on the kind of algorithms that they put together, which are often extremely kind of opaque. You don't know why your particular book doesn't come up on a search, and it's not always very obvious to the people who are loading the books onto those why that's happening. So it becomes slightly kind of mysterious. You're always kind of trying to catch up with the various search engine, graduation of where they put you. So I don't know. I think that might be a kind of bit of a muddled answer to a question which is talking about something which is changing constantly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a muddle, and I think I just wonder, Pierpaolo, if I mean, it's impossible to say definitively, but all this Twitter and Facebook and all this social media, I mean, does it actually translate into more sales?
Not immediately. However, what it can do, I think, is, especially with regard to the authors, and this is something which I've seen more and more from many publishers, is that the authors, in a sense, become your best marketing tool. So an author who has 20 or 30,000 followers on Twitter or on Instagram will be your best possible kind of shop front, in a sense. And, to be able to get people who have a big following and a very specific following, which is related to the book, maybe review your book or say something about it, is going to make a huge difference to the sales in a way that maybe now, a catalogue which goes out to all the parishes or all your previous clients, it'll have a much bigger effect than that, and often for a much smaller amount of money.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a kind of publisher's dream to have those followings for their authors. But Fiorella, I'm assuming it's an author's nightmare because it's if you didn't have enough to do.
Well, this is it. I think, unfortunately, authors, I don't want to make too much of a generalization, but I think if you're the sort of person who likes sitting in a quiet room writing 80,000 words.
Which is most authors, right?
Sorry?
Which is most authors, right?
Yeah. You're maybe not going to be desperately comfortable showing off in front of a media platform and taking selfies and doing all that stuff. I mean, I'm not a natural marketer, or I would have gone into advertising. Sorry, can everyone hear my dog barking? I'm just trying to ignore him. But it's sort of inevitable. You're expected to market your books. It's usually part of the contractual obligation to do so. I do not do Twitter. I have to admit, I think it's a snake pit. I don't have any desire to get caught up in some. I'll say the wrong thing and end up with some lynch mob. I could just see it coming. And I long for the day when I have 30,000 followers on Instagram. But hey, follow me on Instagram, everyone. Let's see if we can't get the 30,000 followers.
So, Pierpaolo, I mean, is there ever the possibility that you could have people who are great media personalities, who are fantastic at working Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and all the rest, but can't write? But somehow they're the people that are going to get published, and they're the people that are going to sell books.
They already are. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every autobiography of a footballer is an exact kind of that is the model. You get it kind of ghostwritten and they put their name to it, and I think that's very much what will be happening. Between a great writer without a social media account and a mediocre one with thousands of followers, I think most publishers would go for the latter very quickly, unfortunately, but that's where we are.
We are all Catholic, and the vocation of a Catholic writer has been talked about quite a lot, and there's some understanding of that, and I'll come to you in a minute, Fiorella, to get your take on that. But what would you see, Pierpaolo, as the vocation of the Catholic publisher? Well,
I think our strapline as the Catholic Truth Society is God's truth beautifully told, and I think in a sense that really sums up what the Catholic publishers vocation is. We have a wealth of teaching. We have a treasury of art, of music, of literature, which just needs to find a conduit to the people of today. Yeah. And in a sense, what the publisher is there to do is to take slices of that wonderful tradition that we have and present them in a way which makes sense to the man of today. Whether that's in the way that it's presented, or whether that's through the format, or sometimes whether it's really spotting a gap in the market, or something which isn't being said, and bringing, filling that gap, finding the correct, the perfect author for that. And in a sense, we see it very much as a missionary work.
Yes.
We're there to explain the faith to whoever is looking for answers. And we're trying desperately to come up with the best ways to do that every time. And we're a publisher. We need to make some money to be able to invest into future projects, and we need to sell books, not because any of us is getting rich on it, but because good sales, I think, is a measure of having fulfilled a need. Absolutely. A need, and I think that's what we're there for.
Fiorella, as a writer, you are independent in terms of what you write, but you are very dependent on a publisher when it comes to actually getting your work out into the world. Without publishers, writers, I know some writers self-publish, but it's an uphill task. Having a publisher behind you is a great benefit. But what would you like to say to Catholic publishers in particular about their marketing or the way in which they're doing business? What advice would you give Pierpaolo to kind of broaden the market, to reach the masses, to have your works, discussed on Radio 4 and in the Booker shortlist? I think
Pierpaolo, your work is very specific. You don't publish fiction, for example, which is now my field.
Yet.
But so it's a very, very different world. As far as I'm concerned, the whole point for me of being a writer is to write good stories, and the truth of the Catholic faith should come through that. But first and foremost, it's about writing a story, and there's always the fear, I think, for a novelist of sort of writing propaganda rather than writing a story. But I think my publisher is a Catholic publisher, Ignatius Press. I think there's the need for publishers to be courageous certainly when they're publishing fiction, to avoid just being homey and safe, and be prepared to publish more challenging books that are, of course, entirely loyal to the faith and are not going to confuse anybody. But I think I fear there is a bit of a danger, because the church is so under attack in so many places, of sort of battening down the hatches, and trying to just trying to retreat back into hagiography and to maybe avoid appearing too secular, avoid scaring the horses. So I think there's a balance somewhere, certainly for publishers of fiction, to just allow the Catholic creative spirit to breathe.
What would you say to that, Pierpaolo?
That's a wonderful call from an author to a publisher to do the thing that most publishers are most terrified of, which is taking a risk. Obviously, we all want to go for that kind of safe book that we know is going to get our what we need. But I think it's true that business as usual can't really kind of continue. We're in a very changing world. There's lots of new pressures, and we need to find new and imaginative solutions in order to be able to kind of push that forward. Whether that's really, you're right, we don't publish fiction at the moment, but that may well be something that needs to change. Because that is what people are reading. So we need to go in that direction, find out how we can put that Catholic truth across in a new way for us.
Of course, today, Pierpaolo, there are many different media possibilities for something like the Catholic Truth Society. If the Catholic Truth Society was starting today instead of in the 19th century, we've got videos, we've got podcasts, we've got audio books, we've got. Are there certain things that you sort of think that the Catholic world needs to engage more with in terms of getting its message out. That yes, the iconic racks at the back of the church with the wonderful pamphlets, but that fits a certain demographic. But the kind of children that you and Fiorella have, they're walking around with their headphones in all the time. So, I mean, is the CTS turning its mind to other sort of more 21st century possibilities?
No, certainly. We've started a kind of podcast series where we go into a bit of depth with some of our authors into the kinds of subjects that they've been writing about. And I think it's very interesting if you look at the most popular podcasts that are available in the kind of secular sphere. Joe Rogan's podcast, for example, which gets millions of views and which lasts anything between 2 and 3 hours. I saw the last one he put out was 3 hours, 20 minutes.
Wow.
And most people, would have told you, no, we need to go for short. People are losing their attention span, all the rest of it. Whereas what we're seeing is actually a renaissance in the long form interview where people can really kind of have a discussion, a bit like what we're doing at the moment.
Yes.
Talk about things where almost as much as what things that are being talked about is the people and people who are kind of steeped in that subject, and it's just good to spend time with them. And I think that's something that we need to kind of look at in future as a way of really allowing people to be in the company of faithful Catholics who have something to say to our world today. And that's certainly something that we will be looking to roll out and to enter into kind of partnerships with people like yourselves at EWTN to be able to do that, to spend some time in company with good, faithful Catholics talking about the real issues. Because
I guess your predecessors who founded the Catholic Truth Society, they had a message. I mean, it says it on the tin, Catholic Truth. And what they wanted to do was propagate that truth in at that time, a hostile world. It was a very anti-Catholic world across the British Isles. Catholicism had barely been legal, maybe 20 years by the time the Catholic Truth Society kicked off. But it's nothing much has changed. We have a hostile environment in which we're operating, and we have an audience which is indifferent at best to the message we're trying to say. But it's the message that we're trying to get out. Fiorella, in your fiction, there is a thin line, and you've alluded to it earlier, between a kind of, well, if I could sort of use a rather bland caricature, there are certain Catholic novels which are high on the doctrine quotient, but poor in terms of drama and fiction. You know what I'm saying. So how does somebody like you, who's written so many books and have been really well received by both Catholics and non-Catholics, but how do you balance that out so that it is truly your voice, and it's a voice which is going to appeal to a wide audience, but it somehow retains a Catholicism within it, yet doesn't turn into a sort of fictionalized version of the Catechism?
Well, this is exactly the problem. And it's not just a Catholic problem. In fact, I've read a number of Christian authors where I've been bored witless by the end of the first chapter, so I don't imagine they're going to convert anybody when I'm on their side. But I think, for me, it keeps coming back to the fact that you're there as a writer to be a storyteller. If you live your life within the Catholic moral universe, then everything you write will be imbued with that, with the truth of the faith. It will just come naturally, and that's really the way I see it. And I think that's the problem when you do get these very propagandist or hagiographical novels. They've put the cart before the horse. Yeah. They've thought of the bit of doctrine they want to put forward, and then they kind of very falsely and awkwardly construct a story around it, and anyone can see through that. Children know when they're being preached at. My children cannot stand most modern children's stories because they've all got very improving messages. Well,
this is true. I mean, it's not something unique or particular to Catholicism. I mean, we live in a propaganda age where certainly the film industry and also literature has had to adhere to certain secular norms or secular whatever the latest trend is, and that they have to sign up for it. Pierpaolo, when it comes to submissions to the CTS, I would imagine that your submission pile will get you many years off purgatory.
Oh well, I mean, certainly the COVID crisis has brought many who have been waiting for 3 months locked in their house to finally write their Catholic book, and a lot of them have ended up on our desk. No, and I mean, in a sense, it's beautiful to see that people are spending time on this kind of thing, and they think that it's something valuable. And we're honoured that, you know, the text that they've been waiting to write for so many years, they've actually sent it in to us. It's always a great honour, and we treat the manuscripts that come in with great respect. Unfortunately, sometimes, you know, you have a publishing program that's, you know, maybe you're thinking about things a year or a year and a half ahead, and, you know, may just not fit into the program that you're running at the moment. But I would say, in terms of, you know, what some publishers rather rudely refer to as the slush pile. Yeah. You know, there are interesting things that come in, and often they are things which will spark off an idea, and maybe the way that it's written there is not quite right, and you go back to them and you kind of reshape it. And certainly we've had some good stuff come in through there. However, it tends to be the other way around, you know, where we'll see a gap, or we'll see something which we think really is important for us to respond to, and we'll go looking for somebody to write that. Or the other thing that often happens is, you know, you'll be reading around, you'll be reading the odd article, and you'll think, now this, you know, an expanded version of this would really be useful. Absolutely. for our readers.
I mean, until you're actually in the publishing process and either writing for it or in your case publishing, you just don't understand, looking in from the outside, how complex the publisher's world is. As you say, you're working on schedules which are years and years in advance. You're planning different things. You know your market. You know what you're looking for, you know, to fill the various gaps. And yet you're still a sort of random sort of drive-by for every person who wants to get published. Fiorella, as an author, you've moved a long way from the slush pile. You're now an established author, but you probably remember those early stages, those tentative steps into the publishing market. And from a writer's perspective, it's terrifying, no?
It's petrifying, and it's not just that it's frightening, but it's extremely confusing. It's almost like venturing into a completely foreign country and not understanding the language, not being able to read any of the signs, and everybody's refusing to talk to you. It's very difficult, I think, and it's easy to forget once you are established and, you know, you've got a good relationship with your publisher and you're the person they do get. People do turn to say, would you like to write a book? You forget actually how frightening that is. And unfortunately, a lot of the advice that aspiring writers are given is very outdated. We were always told, get the Writers and Artists Yearbook and find some publishers who publish your genre and send them the first 5 chapters. You know, there's a whole thing you're told to do. Whereas, in fact, in my experience, that was never the way it really worked. It was finding somebody on whose desk you could plonk the thing, because the slush pile is a reality, and publishers I know get hundreds of manuscripts, you know, landing on their desks every day. So it's a very difficult one to navigate. And I think with the big publishers gobbling up the little publishers, it's becoming, the publishing industry can seem very faceless. You know, there was a time when there were just a lot more publishers to choose from, and there were more publishers perhaps, you know, who could take a risk with a new author. Because I am aware, and I don't want to seem to be demonizing publishers here. I think it is very daunting for a publisher to have to take on a new author, you know, and for a small publishing house, that could break a publishing house if they make a mistake, if they think that something's going to be a big seller and it doesn't work. So I think yes, it can be quite soul destroying for an aspiring author, and I'd like to see more mentor programs actually for aspiring writers, so that they have somebody to guide them. most of us did it in an ad hoc way. We found somebody who was prepared to help us out, but actually having somebody perhaps who could just show you the way it works, someone like who can just explain, the publishers aren't there to get you and to send you a rejection letter. They do have processes. The fact that there are programs, there are catalogues, that a book has to fit within a catalogue. That's something I did not understand at all when I first started writing. I get letters from publishers saying, "Oh, we loved it, but it doesn't fit within our catalogue." And I went, well, make space, squeeze it in, please. There's a whole language there that you have to sort of learn as a writer. And I think possibly just breaking down that sort of mystery a bit. I also think, if I can say, in response to something you were saying, Piero, about the fact that CTS has always worked within a hostile environment. I think perhaps the big difference between when CTS was first founded, when, as you say, Catholicism had only just become legal, and today, is that even though there has always been a lot of hostility to the Catholic faith, in Victorian times there was at least some sort of shared values. And I think for the Catholic author today, we are writing in such an alien world in all sorts of ways. There are now no longer any certainties. And that in itself can be very difficult. And I think that's possibly where the novel can be a very good vehicle for telling the truth, because it's a way of rewriting the narrative.
Yes, it's interesting as well, Pierpaolo, that the CTS was founded, and just at the time when mass literacy started, certainly in the British Isles, those various education acts. We had the sort of phenomenon of people like Dickens, and also, other authors, and the serial, and the way that reading and writing suddenly created an audience. 150 years on, you're sitting on the edge of a new revolution. I mean, I think we've only started this kind of multimedia world that we're moving into. Are there any things that you would point to that the CTS is actively engaged in, or about to get engaged in, which is part of that sort of zeitgeist that we're moving into?
I mean, one thing that we have engaged in quite a bit, and I think this follows a little bit the way that we consume media has had an effect on the way that we read as well. Reading a book cover to cover is, I think, a rarity really in today's very distraction-rich environment. How often can you really get like a quiet evening, spend 2-3 hours to read through a book from beginning to end? I think there are hundreds of different things calling for your attention. So the book which is able to be looked at in various kind of snippets is the one, I think, where you can just pick it up, have a quick look, leaf through it, pick up a few kind of interesting tidbits and put it down without necessarily having to go all the way through it. And that's certainly something that we've been looking at. I mean, one of our bestsellers is this youth catechism called UCAT, and it's very interesting. If you look at the whole layout, it looks very much like a kind of web page in the sense it's got a kind of bar down the right, which gives you some interesting quotations or some references, and the sections can be kind of picked up, looked at. Even the pages can be looked at very, very separately and very quickly. And you can look at the information that's at the bottom, at the side, and I think that follows, in a sense, what we've seen happen to the way that people interact with books. We've tried to keep pace with that as well. Lots of short paragraphs, lots of subheadings, those things which allow a book to be sort of more user-friendly to people who are not so used to reading a long tome or a very extended piece of prose.
Now, whatever age we're living in, we are Catholics, writers and publisher, and there's always something, I think, about the Word was made flesh, which is central to our faith and that beautiful start of John's Gospel. I mean, it almost says that there's something about the Word, our words, and the Word, obviously, which is sacred, which is special, which is, communicating something of the truth. And I wonder if those words sort of inform our respective vocations in terms of working in communications.
Well, I think the importance of, I don't know if it's different for a publisher, but I suppose we are both dealing with words, and we're both dealing with the words as a form of communication. Certainly, I think we live in a world where paradoxically we've become incredibly paranoid about the words we use. And a person's career can be ruined because they accidentally use a term that's deemed to be offensive, say. Whereas because of social media and because it's so much easier to produce material quickly, we do bandy words about without really any concern for whether they're true, any concern whether they're necessary. And I suppose for the Catholic writer, and this may be true also of the Catholic publisher, I'm very aware of the power of words. That you can destroy a person's reputation using the wrong words. You can mislead a person, but you can also empower a person with the truth. You can also give a person hope. But I'm very conscious that every word I say, not just every word I write, is said in the presence of Jesus Christ.
Yes. I'm wondering, Pierpaolo, if there's something, you were talking about the beauty of the creation of a book and how much energy and imagination goes into that. Is there something sort of incarnational ultimately in the role of the Catholic publisher, where you're taking people's words and turning them into something which is incarnational, something which is real in front of them?
No, absolutely. I mean, obviously, as soon as you said the word made flesh, you kind of think of your own role in doing that and taking these words which exist in the mind of an author and then making them into a kind of reality that can be read for generations to come. I mean, that's one of the most beautiful things about books, is that essentially once they're printed, they can last hundreds of years. And anyone who has some nice old books in their house knows that. I mean, one thing that I'm, to speak on kind of behalf of publishers, it's true that there's been like a kind of a revolution in the immediacy of the way people can put out their thoughts and their opinions via social media, via blogs, via Facebook, all these different things, without the intermediary, which is a publisher. And I think that has, we've seen that with, some of the discourse in politics, which has coarsened somewhat, which has become full of things which are untrue or fake news, all these different kind of buzzwords which have ended up coming because there hasn't been any filter. And I think it's very interesting that places like Twitter or Facebook have resisted the nomenclature of a publisher, because then, in a sense, they would be responsible.
Yes, that's true.
To a certain extent for what comes through their platform.
Yes.
Whereas the publisher actually does take responsibility for what they publish, and therefore puts themselves in that rather dangerous position of saying, no, we approve of this thing.
Yes. We
agree with the text that we put out. And they undertake a certain kind of quality control. Now, whether that's, whether some people could see that as, a danger in a sense, that we are either propagandists or we're actually censoring people. But what we do is we are like the first line of defense against, the weird and the wonderful that comes in. Yes. And we could say, no, well, we look for editors who are properly formed in the faith, who can spot, something which would be, misrepresenting the church's teaching. And I think that role is very important, and people need to be able to kind of buy into or see you as a trustworthy source. Well, if it comes out with the CTS's logo on it, and you can be sure that that is the Catholic faith.
I think that I was just about to say that, Pierpaolo. I think the CTS is a tried and trusted brand, and it's what it says on the tin. We know what it's going to say. Now, unfortunately, the Euro Express is rolling into its platform. We've come to the end of our journey. It's the first of many. I hope that you both will take on this train. But it's been a fascinating discussion about Catholic literature and Catholic publishing. I hope that the CTS thrives for many, many more centuries to come. And I look forward to seeing your ever-increasing library of published works, Fiorella, in the near future as well. So for now, Fiorella in Surrey and Pierpaolo in London, thank you very much.
Thank you.